Standardized recipes are an important tool in the Child and Adult Care Food Program, CACFP. While standardized recipes are common in food service, they mean something different for every industry and program.
A standardized recipe, it's a way for the center or operation to ensure that every child receives a similar quantity of food. It ensures that it's the same each time.
By the end of this training video, you will have an improved understanding of the importance and use of standardized recipes for CACFP and how they impact the foods you serve to your children. Having standardized recipes shouldn't be seen as a scary process, but rather as an easy way to help you manage the foods being served to children, which allows you to meet all CACFP program requirements. In this training video, we will define what, when, and why standardized recipes are needed in CACFP, identify the components of standardized recipe forms, and explain some of the benefits of standardized recipes. Some food prepared in this video was for demonstration purposes only. Ready-to-eat food must not be handled with bare hands. Always use utensils or single-use gloves during preparation and serving. Before we understand what, when, and why a standardized recipe is needed in CACFP, we first need to understand three terms: food component, food item, and combination food. First, what is a food component? Food component means one of the food categories that comprise a reimbursable meal. The food components in the CACFP are grains, vegetables, fruits, meat alternates, and milk. CACFP providers must always offer the food components that comprise a reimbursable meal for each meal type, breakfast, lunch, supper, and PM/AM snack, in at least the minimum required amounts. What is a food item? A food item refers to a specific food offered within the food components comprising the reimbursable meal. For example, separate 1/2 cup servings of peas and carrots are two food items that comprise the vegetable component. And what is a combination food? A combination food contains more than one food item from different food components that cannot be separated, such as soup. Other examples of combination food are prepared sandwiches, burritos, and some salads, such as chef salad. It is important to understand these definitions because they help determine when you need a standardized recipe. Every agency that participates in CACFP must document how a reimbursable meal is served. A reimbursable meal must contain required food components in accurate portion sizes. Standardized recipes help show that a reimbursable meal is served. Now, what is a standardized recipe? The general definition of a standardized recipe is a recipe that has been tried, adapted, and retried several times for use by a given food service operation and has been proven to produce the same good results in yield every time. It is a good management tool to ensure that the product is the same every time it is served. Standardized recipes are used in different ways by many types of businesses, organizations, and individuals who prepare and serve food. So what is a standardized recipe for CACFP?
It's been tested to provide consistent results every single time that it's being used. It also has been standardized to determine the specific food components that are within the recipe.
So when we make a stew or a soup or something that combines ingredients, then we're able to show that we do have enough meat, we have enough vegetables, that it meets the portion sizes that are required for the children.
For CACFP, a written standardized recipe is required for combination foods, a menu item combining two or more food items, and it may include two or more food components or not, such as vegetable soup. Single food items don't need a standardized recipe. Examples include pineapples, green beans, brown rice.
So if you're serving celery sticks with peanut butter, that's 2 ingredients and 2 components. You need to have a recipe written down with each ingredient and how much of each ingredient is needed and how to divide that recipe so that the serving size meets the requirements.
A peanut butter and jelly sandwich is bread, jelly, and peanut butter and is therefore a combination food because you're combining different ingredients to make the one food item.
Everyone knows how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but everyone makes it differently. The reason why you'd want to have a standardized recipe for something like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you want to make sure that the peanut butter component that is included in the sandwich meets the requirements.
The bread could be a creditable food item as your grain component, and your peanut butter could be a creditable food item as your meat alternate. In which case you want to make sure you have a recipe that you can show that you have enough bread and peanut butter to satisfy those components for each child.
There are other combination foods that you may purchase at a store, for example, frozen pizza or lasagna. It is a challenge to credit some of these items as meeting 2 food components because you will need to have documentation of the specific measurement contributions for each food component. It is a requirement that if you serve these products, you obtain a product formulation statement or child nutrition label. If you can't get this document, then you will have to remove this menu item from your menus. Furthermore, you cannot add additional meat or meat alternate or another component to the product to make it meet requirements. For example, you can't add additional ground beef or cheese to lasagna. If you have further questions about product formulation statements or child nutrition labels, please contact your CACFP Program Administration Specialist. Another reason you need a standardized recipe is if you are combining creditable foods and non-creditable foods. For example, pretzels and popcorn. Only pretzels are creditable as a grain. Therefore, a provider must have a standardized recipe that shows how each serving will have enough pretzels to meet the minimum grain requirement. The popcorn is an extra.
The USDA Crediting Handbook is a great tool that helps you identify the different components and what is creditable and what is not.
The Crediting Handbook lists out different food items and determines if they are creditable. Often there are updates to the handbook, so it is important you use the most current version on the United States Department of Agriculture webpage. During a review of a CACFP program, OSCNP staff will be asking to see a month's menu and will specifically ask to look at any standardized recipes and food labels within a chosen week. It is important to have all your standardized recipes in one place so you can easily share them with OSCNP staff. If a menued item needs a standardized recipe, then it should be available for OSCNP staff to see at any time during normal business hours. What will compliance staff be looking for in a standardized recipe? The state of Maryland does not have a required standardized recipe form, but there are several recommended and required components of standardized recipes.
A standardized recipe is always a written document, and it should include the name of the recipe, and the name of the recipe should match how the item is listed on the menu for the meals that are served at the child meal location. It should include a list of all the ingredients that are used and the weight or the measure of each ingredient that's used to prepare the recipe. It should include specific instructions about how to cook or combine the ingredients. It should include the portion size that should be served to each child. And it should include any other additional instructions about if it's a hot food preparation, what the critical control points, they call it, for food safety.
You also need to specify what age group or groups would be served this item. For example, 1 to 2-year-olds, 3 to 5-year-olds, 6 to 12-year-olds. This is because the portion size requirements for certain food components are different for different age groups. Equipment and utensils also need to be noted. Be specific about the correct cooking equipment and the utensils needed to serve correct portion sizes to children of different age groups. How does the recipe credit in CACFP? Show specifically the recipe's contribution to meeting the meal pattern requirements for the different food components. And please note this may differ by age of children, too. And remember, for CACFP, you can always serve more of any food component or food item to any child, but never less. When writing your own standardized recipe, it's helpful to initially write your recipe for a one-portion serving so you can ensure you are providing enough of each of the creditable food components for an individual child before scaling the recipe for multiple portions.
You can make your own standardized recipes. If you have a recipe that the children in your center absolutely love but can't be found in a cookbook or online, you can create your own from a recipe you've used in the past.
While you may have recipes in your head or find them online or in cookbooks, it is important that you transfer these recipes into a standardized recipe format for your program. These online or cookbook recipes are not standardized recipes and may not contain the required amounts of food components to meet the nutrition requirements for your food program. These types of recipes will not count for a standardized recipe when your CACFP program is reviewed. When you are writing your standardized recipes, it's important to have the current USDA crediting handbooks and the meal pattern charts to build recipes that meet your program's nutrition requirements.
There are meal pattern charts that can be used as a tool. They show how much of each food component is the minimum required to be served to children in each age group. That's helpful when you're sitting down to document the recipes, especially if you're making it for just one portion. You can write a recipe to include all of the requirements that are served in that one menued item that meet the minimum requirements for the age group that you're serving in your program.
You may also want to look at existing CACFP childcare standardized recipes. USDA and other states' child nutrition programs have created, tested, and released CACFP standardized recipes. Most of these recipes were developed to yield 25 and 50 servings, but you can always adjust based on your current enrollment and attendance. Resources for standardized recipes can be found at USDA Team Nutrition and the Institute for Child Nutrition.
Tasting the recipe before it's served would be a best practice, just to make sure that it's favorable among the children. I would recommend taste testing it with the children.
Remember to review standardized recipes with all staff who prepare or serve the recipe. By allowing time to review the recipe with all staff, they have the opportunity to ask questions and ensure the recipe is always being followed. And there are benefits for using standardized recipes. For one thing, standardized recipes help ensure that every child is given the correct portion size they need to receive for a meal to be reimbursable.
It helps with labor costs and better grocery shopping, more efficient grocery shopping, because you're able to, what to purchase in the quantities that are needed, and it meets requirements.
When you have standardized recipes and you know how many students are participating in your program for a particular day or a particular week, you can calculate how much of an item you need to prepare so it minimizes on food waste. And it ensures that the food that's being served meets the requirements of the child nutrition programs.
Efficiency, lower costs, consistency, and ensuring proper nutrition for your children. All these are great reasons for incorporating standardized recipes in the meal planning at your child care facility.
Now it's time to practice using standardized recipes. The first step is to determine if a standardized recipe is needed for menued items that will be served as a part of CACFP. Let's look at 3 different examples from child care centers that participate in CACFP. All 3 centers serve meals to children ages 2 through 5 years old. All 3 centers serve pasta with meat and tomato sauce, but each center has menued, prepared, and served their dishes differently. Let's look at the first center's menu for this meal. Macaroni pasta, meatballs, tomato sauce, oranges, milk. In this example, everything is cooked separately. The pasta is boiled in one pot. The meatballs are heated in one pan, and sauce is cooked in its own pot. They serve their meal through family-style dining. Pasta, meatballs, and tomato sauce are placed separately in common serving bowls for each table, and separate serving utensils are placed with the bowls, meeting minimal serving requirements. Here's how the second center's meal is listed on their menu. Pasta with red sauce and meatballs, oranges, milk. In this example, staff in the kitchen boil the pasta in a large pot. In a separate pot, the red sauce and meatballs are combined and cooked together. Finally, the third center has menued their meal this way: pasta baked with meatballs, broccoli, oranges, milk. In this example, the pasta is prepared as a casserole. Cooked pasta is mixed with red sauce and meatballs, placed into a casserole dish, and baked in the oven for 20 minutes. When the pasta bake is ready, each child is served a measured scoop from the casserole dish. In these different examples of CACFP meals with pasta, red sauce, and meatballs, which uses a standardized recipe? Example 1, Example 2, or Example 3? If you said 2 and 3, you are correct. With the first example, a standardized recipe is not needed because each food component is menued, prepared, and served separately. For examples 2 and 3, a standardized recipe is needed to ensure enough pasta, meat, and red sauce are prepared and served to meet each food component's minimum requirement for each child's serving.
Now you know when you need a standardized recipe. Now it's important to review your own written menus. See how you list each menued item. Think about the preparation methods being used and how you are serving these menu items to your children. Identify which items need a standardized recipe. If you do have items that need a standardized recipe, you can learn more in the video on how to write a standardized recipe.